Life is such a blur. Email details, more stuff. My business is consuming me. Am I really living? When do I get to do what energizes me and enjoy the rewards? Welcome to your second life. All is now doing what you love and loving what you do. It's radical creativity. Here's your host, the VIP coach, John Davidson.
Folks, it's Radical Creativity. You are listening to the Radical Creativity podcast from the VIP coach. And we're live from Huntington Beach. This is Radical Creativity, formerly what used to be No Hype Allowed. And we're very pleased to bring this to you folks. You know, you are an entrepreneur, and hopefully the person listening to this show is an experienced entrepreneur around the world. You either have one enterprise or several enterprises, and you've come to a point in your career where you've said, what's the point of all this? You know, I'm putting all this effort in. I've got all these people working for me, but can I really get home at 6 o'clock at night? How do I get home at 6 o'clock at night? What do I do with all this constant change? How do I keep up with all the technology that's coming my way? How do I make the most of the technology that I already have? How do I get along with the partners in my business and make the most of our team and our alignment? Do we have a shared vision, or are we at odds with each other without the ability to communicate truthfully? So these are probably some of the questions that you're having. How do I become more productive? How do I become more profitable? How do I make the most of my time? How do I deal with things that don't go my way? How do I deal with the unexpected conditions, the unexpected downturns that suddenly go downward and I don't expect them? How do I endure the slow periods? Do I have the emotional toughness, the mental toughness, the business toughness to get through some of the weather systems that I encounter in my business? How do I rekindle the spirit of my youth? That energy level that I had, that vigor that I had at the beginning of the business. How do I maintain the course of my desires? These are some of the inner thoughts of the listeners of the VIP Coach, the Radical Creativity Podcast. And remember, folks, the purpose of this podcast is to bring into one three main aspects that incorporate a theory I call radical creativity. And I'm hoping that you become a radical creative by listening to this show, that you know that Entrepreneurship 3.0 is about reclaiming your wholeness. That's right. There's no way that you can get ahead in business without stoking your creative fire. And that's what this show is going to be about today. It's about stoking your creative fire and keeping it going. Because what you're up against today is you're up against how you're going to make the most of the changing world that you're doing business in. You are in the term that the Army coined back in the 1990s, the VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous marketplace, where, as Bob Johansson would say in Leaders Who Make the Future, great book, I suggest that you get it, the 10 leadership qualities coming into this time. What he says is that volatility yields vision. Yep. That uncertainty yields understanding. That complexity yields clarity. And that ambiguity yields agility. It's like staccato steps running over sharp rocks. That is the best description that I could get to it, that I could describe, because that describes my experience. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, my hope is that you're doing what you love and you're loving what you're doing. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes. Let's get to the point here. What can you do to keep your creative fire? How do you keep your creative fire stoked? Well, when you started your business, you came in, you probably were pretty good at something. You weren't totally masterful at what you did. And over a period of years, 10, 15, 20 years, as you've gotten bigger and bigger checks for what you do, as you've created more value for your audience, you have gotten pretty damn good at what you do. But you know, what happens over that time is an interesting fossilization. Something exhausts itself, and it has to do with It's something that is so paradoxical that we often miss. In other words, the better that we get, the more answers that we have, the more expertise that we have, the more full we are for anything new. And I find that a lot of entrepreneurs are holding on to all these old forms and structures and their methods and their technologies. They become so skilled, they become so knowledgeable, they become so fit for what they're doing that it becomes their biggest downfall. Because everything they're doing going forward is compatible with that. And there could be an opportunity that flashes right in front of them, but they're only creating consistent with what they know. And that's not what the creative process is. Nope. The creative process starts with germination. That's right. We often have to look outside of our boundaries. We have to look outside of the familiar. We have to look outside of our identity. And that means we have to look for things that aren't really believable. We have to look for the new. In fact, you might even say that the new is always looking for us. It's just whether we're going to bring ourselves into it. As Bob Johansson would say, we have runways everywhere. In the VUCA world, there are always opportunities that are ready to take off. There's really nothing new, but there are always runways that are ready to take off, and it's about whether we can truly receive them and bring ourselves into them, and that's how we get to our creative fire. But what's the internal process? What's the internal process? Well, I think there are 4 stages. There are 4 elements to continuously stoking your creative fire, and there are a lot of rituals around them that I'd like to share with you that we teach in the VIP Coach. But as I say these to you, just check this out. Birth. That any time we initiate something, we innovate, we have to take a meaningful leap into some uncertainty. Isn't that what it is to really create? Think about the moments. Think about the moments in the last month or 2 or 3. Think about the year. And go back and look at those moments when you came to an edge. You came to a point where you had to go beyond. You had to go beyond your 5 senses. You had to go beyond what you were comfortable with. You faced fear. And yet, you had such a meaningful reason to jump. Maybe it was a new business pursuit. Maybe it was a new alliance. Maybe it was a new product that you wanted to bring forth. Maybe it was another business to buy. We have risk potential all over the place. We get opportunities and runways all over the place. And if, like I've said in the show before, if we're sunk in all the details and we're preoccupied with too much stuff, we won't get to it. But I think what we're talking about here is the willingness to look like a fool. One of the biggest restraints I find with a lot of entrepreneurs inwardly is their levels of judgment. They edit themselves. And because of the way they see themselves, they make decisions out of that. Their identity limits them. They get so caught in proving how great they are, in all the foolish pride, that they don't want to step into the new because it would make them look like a fool. And they wouldn't want to look like a fool because that would jeopardize the very credibility that their expertise is built upon. So how do we really move into the new territory? What do we have to give up? Well, Bill Isaacs, the author of Dialogue, talks about this idea of crossing a threshold. That to lead really means to die. And the first step is about birth. And birth has to do with this dying. In fact, it has to do with some severance of some kind. It has to do with severing something. I think he's talking about severing something from the past. That we bring ourselves into the moment without any reference to the past, to what people are thinking about us. That's the foolish pride piece. To what we're thinking about ourselves. That's probably the basis and the origins of our pride. It's our shame. Or not being so caught in the future, but yet being unattached to the outcome, wanting our stated intentions, listening to our hearts, but yet not being attached to what the outcome has to be, letting go of control. To me, that's what severance is. Because when I look beneath my levels of control, wanting it my way, the way it's supposed to be, the way it should be, the way it was supposed to turn out, I begin to realize that, it's not always consistent with what I know. It's not always consistent with what I think about myself. It's not always consistent with what I think others are thinking. It's inconsistent. In fact, Einstein created a whole thought experiment like this, the Gedanken thought experiments. He had an observational process, and when he was most creative, he suspended his reflexes to find a theory of everything. There was no theory of everything. In fact, the more he looked for it, the less he saw the truth. But when he looked independently, freshly, He looked into the moment from nowhere. Not from the past, not the future, not from him, not from them, but from here, from this moment. The accuracy of his perception illuminated his enlightened mind. He was able to see a dimension, peek into a dimension that was right there, an open door, because he stepped into a different range of consciousness. You see, he severed. He severed from the need to look for the field of everything. He called it looking at the unbelievable. And he said, we don't start into the moment from a belief or a concept. We can contain that. We can bounce that into the bleachers. Instead, we can start with the facts. We can look for new truth. We can enter into the moment. And what do we find? We have to cross a threshold. And what's across the threshold? A creative fire. We have to leave where we were, go away, and then come back into the world from which we left. We have to birth. Birth is like changing of a season. So this process starts with waking up. We wake up from the dream, and we come into reality as it is with an accurate perception. But in order to do that, we have to willingly show up and be present. So what we might do is, instead of crossing the threshold at the level of action, at the level of incremental change as leaders would pursue, we have to cross it at the level of flow. You know, in the 2005 commencement speech to Stanford University, remember, Steve Jobs said that we can only connect the dots by looking back. But we have to have some sense of deep knowing that going forward, no matter how the good or the bad or the ugly looks right here, we know that the dots are connecting. We know that everything the future needs is being given to us in this moment. We have to find what's perfect about oftentimes what's really not perfect. So the first level that we cross this threshold, that we leave the world and come back, this birth, it starts with an initiation. And that initiation is initiating into the present. It's initiating into the moment, receiving the moment, and seeing heart and meaning in what's going on. And how do we see heart and meaning in what's going on? We have to suspend our contaminated, conditioned, habitual way of thinking. At its worst, our habitual ways of thinking is fundamentalistic. It's fundamentalism, folks. It's blindness. It's absencing the possibilities of what could be different right out of our eyesight, right out of our trained and reflexive ways of seeing. We have to be willing to see our own seeing. Contain our necessary ways to see what's compatible, to feel safe, to feel secure, to be right. Instead, it's to see from nowhere. And that would mean learning how to think. That instead of adding meaning and interpretation to what shows up, we learn to think by looking past our habitual judgments. And what lies beneath is our capacity to perceive out of a different source. The source of our open heart. Our heart that sees meaning. That sees meaning in what's going on. That is the language of the soul. To find meaning. Meaning that either comes into us or we assign meaning to something, but it matters. And out of that heart we serve. And the serving is getting close to the work of the soul, our creative fire, our ultimate creativity. And then we cross the threshold at a level of frequency. That we see patterns and order, a pattern of energy that's emerging. And it wants to come into being. It's as if something from the new is on its way in, and something from the old is on its way out. There's a substitution going on, you see. Will we let it happen? Will we dare ourselves into the presence of it? Because the future is witnessed in the present moment. In fact, it's unfolding, it's uncovering at every moment. It's not a discovery. No, it's an uncovering. It's a deepening of our sources of attention, our levels of awareness, our quality of awareness. And as we let go even more, we drop in and hang out in what Martin Buber calls our open will. The capacity for us to come into the moment from nowhere, and it has to do with severing from our old identity. That in us we have two selves. We have the past and we have the future. And when the future negotiates, when we trust it, when we bring the mystery plan into the plan, when we walk the mystical path with practical feet, we find what Joseph Campbell calls the meeting of two heartbeats, the universe and our own. So how do we cross the threshold? We have to learn how to let go. We have to initiate by showing up and being present, seeing heart and meaning in the moment, being willing to surrender. What lies beneath? What's there? What's left? What comes out of nowhere? A space out of which creations come? Our creative fire. How do we connect with it? Well, that's part 2 of this show. So stay with us. I'm going to talk about the practical ways now in order to encounter and stay with your creative fire. But at this point, we're starting a bonfire. We are creating a way to light the matchstick. How do you get to it? It has to do with how you deepen your level of perception, how you get to that generative, altruistic listening presence. I'll be right back.
Having a life where you have the creative freedom to do what you love and to offer the world something that only you can bring to the table. That is the world of high-level performance with John Davidson. That is the world of radical creativity. That is the world that you can be a part of when you realize all that is holding you back is you. Begin the journey through one-on-one coaching that gives you the finesse for business and lifetime achievement, and find your place on the roadmap to high-level performance today. Visit highlevelperformance.com. Grow your business and grow as a human being with these captivating books authored by the VIP coach himself, John Davidson. The Day I Built My Barbecue is about creative freedom. Learn how you can not only live well, but also grow a thriving business at the same time. John shows you his step-by-step technique with the principles, strategies, and steps to move from a business operator to a business owner. The day you build your barbecue is the day we all wish for. Totally free of distractions. Totally available to living well. Fully present. Then don't miss Unstoppable You. It's about creative value. When we do what we love and love what we do, we discover ways to make our business more fun and monetize our passions. Through stories, tools, and steps, this book will help you bring something to the world that no one else can, and bridge your most unique talents to the deepest aspirations you have of the future, and stand in the presence of all you are. It's about creative purpose. What does it mean to live on purpose? How do we work with the mystery that life presents us at every moment? In this book, John shows us through the silent spaces in life how to connect with our innermost sacred projects and passages. You'll learn how to bring the work, language, and presence of the soul into everything you do. Visit highlevelperformance.com to pick up any of these books in paperback or Kindle editions today. That's highlevelperformance.com. What matters to me? What is my true work? Monetize your passion and enjoy creative freedom with the VIP coach. You're listening to Radical Creativity with executive performance coach John Davidson.
All right, this is the second part of the show. Folks, it's great to be with you. This is JD, and you're listening to Radical Creativity. Show today is about creative fire. If you're an entrepreneur, what we're showing you, what we're working on here is a very key aspect of the VIP Coach coaching program on how the entrepreneur stays in the real intrinsic desire, the space of his ultimate creativity. It's not just about setting goals. It's not just about having a place to go. It's not just about having a vision. It's not enough. We have to find a new way of relating with life. We have to change our terms with the conditions in our life that evoke a kind of leadership, an organic leadership in us that's built on the origins of a creative fire. And this involves something quite deep. It involves getting in touch with aspects of ourself, of dimensions of ourself, at the very ground of our being, to kind of activate a switch that listens to life in an extraordinary way with unconditional confidence that everything the future needs is being given to us in this moment. That doesn't suggest that we're optimistic, because we don't need to pretend. We don't need to lie to ourselves or minimize or deny what's actually going on. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's to get more intimate with life, to wholeheartedly be able to cooperate with the life that's here. When pain is at our doorstep, it isn't to run or hide. It's to get to know it and head into it. It's the difference between the cow and the buffalo, for example, when they react to the storm. Whenever the storm is coming, the cow runs parallel to the storm. The buffalo runs into the storm. How does one learn to stay with the realities that prevail, that play out, that favor us and not favor us, and yet look into and stay with the dynamics of reality? One of the hardest parts of the human condition is to be true to ourselves. And that also includes being true to what we like, what we don't like, being true to what matters to us and doesn't matter, being true to our tendencies, our ugliness, our patterns, our flaws, becoming friendly with ourselves without pretending that we love parts of us when we just can't, when we don't. It involves a certain separation as a creator to maintain our creative fire. It means to move from our first-person orientation, a me orientation toward the moment, to a more third-person orientation, like I talked about in part 1 of the show. It means to strengthen our levels of awareness and be keenly aware and precisely clear about where we are in comparison to what we most importantly want to create. And so what does it really mean to come into these realities with a sense of compatibility and cooperation? And how could it be that the moment that we're having is a signal, a cue, a clue, a crack from the future that's wanting to come into the now and needing us to bring it into reality? We must see that we are an actor of a much larger system, that we begin to see the wholeness of things, that we exist in relationship to something else. In fact, the properties in us are set by the properties in other things, that we never exist without. In other words, if we have a vision, there obviously is a current state of that vision, and that if we, the observer, hold a current state of that vision in comparison to the desired state of the vision we seek to create, it summons a lawful nature that seeks closure. I've talked about it on this show all along. Structural tension, what they teach in music schools. The discrepancy between the current state and the desired state that tends to resolve on its own. So we have to sense, like a surfer on a wave, what the wave wants to do. We have to be willing next to our will. We have to balance the eclipse of our intention to our attention of what wants to emerge. We have to learn the language of emergence and unfoldment, that there are latent possibilities that await us. And if we go into and step into what it is that we want to create, despite knowing how, we don't know how. We choose the what, the heart, and then the mind follows, the how and the why. That we organize our lives around what matters to us. And it begins with the fundamental choice. I choose to be the predominant creative force in my life. That means, what does that mean? That means that I don't animate my actions out of my reactions. That I get to know those reactions. I get to know the responses that I come back with. But that's only one side of the story. What I'm really leading my actions out of is a more dominant force that looks past all of that. What I seek to create. That doesn't suggest that I'm better than reality. That doesn't suggest that I disqualify reality, just the opposite. Whatever the reality is the reality for its sake of accuracy. That I have a choice to be fundamentally true to myself, the second fundamental choice. So as a creator, I really am operating at all times out of two visions. I have my eye on my future and I have an eye on my present. And they have a relationship. They have a dance. That something that comes into the present is often so far away and remote and distant from what I truly want to create. But if I'm not so internalized in my identity, I don't relate with reality out of my identity. I keep that at bay. I observe and I witness what's going on. then I'm better able to use the failure, what's not working, as an asset. That's the practical, is how do I summon the teacher of reality? How do I make life my teacher? So I don't get too close to it, I don't get caught in it, but I am able to be with it. I am able to stay with what is emerging, because reality is never the same. It's always in a state of flux, even more today than ever. So what do? Do I give up on my intentions? No, I hold my intentions. But I'm going to move through time with that. You see, how do I maintain my desire? One is I understand the mechanics of what we're talking about. I know and understand the mechanics of the creative process. But second, we're talking about spirit. Do I have good days all the time? Do I try to reframe and pretend that I'm on a good day? Do I have to use positive thinking to pretend that reality is different than it is? Why do I do that? Well, because it's natural to seek comfort and relief. It's part of human nature to seek survivally, to go from survival to seek pleasure. To seek pleasure, to know that something is better than it is. Because I don't want to be discouraged. I don't want to be let down. So I'm trying to protect myself from my judgment. Instead of saying, why don't I just witness it as it is? Why don't I come into the moment from nowhere? As Twyla Tharp would say in her book, The Creative Habit, to start with nothing. We have to learn to scratch the lottery ticket by heading towards our intention, well positioned with an accurate perception of our attention. What is going on? The relationship between those 2 points has that generative order. But wait a second. A lot of us say, oh my gosh, I've got 80% to go. I've only done 20% of my goal. What we do is we trade out that 80% for a negative feeling. We say, oh, I just don't know. I'm doubting. I'm interpreting. I'm beginning to look at myself. It's got to be something about who I am. No, it's got to be me. No, it's got to be me. We've taken so much responsibility that we've become hazardous to ourselves. We think that we create everything that happens to us. We don't create everything that happens to us. That's folly. The universe has its own wild card. If we created everything that happened to us, how would we really learn? No, we wouldn't be able to learn from the realities that are changing. In fact, we wouldn't even look forward to the surprises, because there would be no surprises. You'd be bored saying, well, I created that, I created that. No, you didn't. So how do we look? We have to see our own seeing and contain that. We see beyond our tendencies to see. Remember in part 1? Remember in section 1 of this show? Right? And then we see from the heart. We see empathically. We see us and them. We see the them. We see it from their point of view. And then we get into presence. Sensing a future possibility that's coming into the now and daring ourselves into it. We merge our intention with our attention. We put our intention at the center of our awareness, as John Milton would say in sacred passages, who takes individuals out on vision quests to go out into nature as the great communication with us and nature. Nature shows us our own nature. What does that mean? It means to decouple from any sense of needing to wear masks. The creative fire is covered up by our need to impress others. And that comes from our shamefulness and our fear, our lack of acceptance, our disownership of ourselves. We can't just come to terms with the fact that we disown things about ourselves. We've got to set ideals of ourselves. So if I believe I'm stupid, I got to make sure the world knows I'm smart. If I believe I'm ugly, I got to make sure the world knows I'm pretty. If I think I am a jerk, I got to make sure I'm kind and nice. But would you look at the motivation there? It's phony. It's synthetic. So what would it mean to decouple from that mask? How do we do that? Well, we recognize what we don't like about ourselves and leave it at that. And then we get familiar with our ideals. And we quit playing that number. We quit tricking ourselves into that mischief. Instead, we look beyond. What is actually going on? We don't ask, who am I? Because that's not a question that could be answered. Dogs aren't preoccupied with who they are. Why should we be? Who am I has nothing to do with your creative fire. Your creative fire has everything to do with letting go of who you think you are on this constant search. Knowing the content of you, knowing your preferences, knowing what you can generate with, knowing the tools that you have, what you don't have, and then you know what to change or adjust. You can take stock or inventory of what you do well and not well. That's not foolish pride. See, that's professional pride. So you're not willing to look like a fool. Right, so you don't want to try new things because you don't want to look stupid. Or you don't want to reinforce what you worry that you are. You don't want to find out that your secret self could be true, the one you hide from everybody. Instead, what you can do is let go of the notion that other people are keeping score. They don't care. In fact, they're thinking more about what you're thinking about them than you are. It's a cosmic joke. You both cancel each other out. So let's wake up. How do you stoke your creative fire? You commit every day to an intentional grounding. You find your creative fire through 4 things. When was the last time you danced? I mean that. When was the last time that you paid attention to your body as a signal? When was the last time you danced? When was the last time you voiced what really mattered to you? When was the last time you sang? Singing is about voicing something from the heart. When was the last time you were enchanted by the stories, your own life story, or the fairy tales? That's vision. When was the last time you enjoyed the sweetness of the silence, the space in between all the things you have to do? Because what we have to do is like the opiate, it's an addiction. We steer away from our inside world to stay external. We don't want to look at it because we might find out what we're doing doesn't matter. Instead, we have to encourage a new bravery, a new tender heart towards ourselves, to be brave and dare ourselves into the moment, into not knowing. And how do we chart into the new frontier, the unknown? We position our desires by choice to lead our choices. We step away from having to know. We have to let go. And when we let go, we let come. You see, we're not as full. When we're empty, we don't know. We make space for what's to come. It's a let go, let come dynamic. That is what it means to presence, to cross the threshold and die while we're alive, which is what leadership means, to step from this world to the next and die while we're alive. When we do it at the level of action, it becomes flow. We do it at the level of learning to think, our structural ways. We learn to think clearly, to be intimate with reality and our experience of reality. We learn to hear the patterns and the orders that are shaping and wanting to emerge. We hear the new identity, who we are from the future that needs us to come into reality. We find ourselves through our deepest urges. So we don't need to search who we are to get to our places to go. We go to our places to go and we come out as we go along. We're drawn forth. We come into being as we set our challenges higher than our perceived skills. In fact, that's our way of happiness, is our pleasurable involvement. And that is where our creative fire is. But daily, we quiet ourselves. We come into a meditation. However we do it, we come into one thing to focus on. In some way, in the morning, in the evening, we quiet ourselves to listen. When something emerges and there's a runway and something wants to take off, we act instantly to learn. We dare ourselves into the presence of it. That's a choice. We hold our deepest intentions without compromise. We don't pretend about current reality. These are the elements, and when we change, we recognize what was released. We recognize what died. And as we integrate back into our moment with whatever we had to gather from that creative fire, we integrate in a way that we're tender. We're tender with that integration like a heart transplant. Whatever we bring back in new is going to take some time to assimilate. We're patient with ourselves to know that period of assimilation where the new has to get in. Creators know about that assimilation. They don't get frustrated. It takes time. And we understand the mechanics of the creative process. We understand how to maintain the spirit through these rituals. And as we shape our destiny out of doing what stands in need of us and what we're really meant to do and listening, new and emergent qualities will change our hearts. It'll change our mind. Will help the world change us. And therein, what lies there is our creative fire. As Rumi would say, the famous poet, dare yourself into a foolish project. Be willing to be a fool. Appreciate you listening to the show today, folks. This will be Radical Creativity Show. It's about your creative fire. If you'd like more information about our coaching services, we have a Category 1 program for professionals, managers, and high-level executives and teams called the VIP Coach. And in and around that, we have all the accessories you need to go to the next level, to become more of who you are and really realize the journey ahead of not only unfolding who you are into what you want to create, but really having that kind of enjoyment and involvement on all aspects so that everything that you're doing is pleasurably involving you, even if it's negative. You find in whatever is being presented to you the teachings of life, to use the energy of your life to wake up. We do that in all aspects with a better business and a better life. Our number is 714-375-6624. We are at highlevelperformance.com. Appreciated you spending the time with us today, folks. And we look forward to the next show. Thank you very much. Radical Creatives, have a productive day.
For more tools on how to liberate your gifts, become more valuable, and on purpose through radical creativity with executive performance coach John Davidson, visit highlevelperformance.com. And be sure to follow John on Facebook. Check back soon to continue the journey toward radical creativity.